It's time for the Video Game Players Club, the call-in video game podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Schultz, and last week we had a great, I think, fantastic first episode. What is the Video Games Players Club? It's a podcast that you listen to, and we talk about video games. It's a call-in show. You can call in through Skype or a phone number, and I'll have those numbers that you can call in at in the mid part of the episode after we discuss this week's topic, which is RPG memories. I wanted to have people cover their experiences playing RPG games, and we have a great show lined up today. We have 8 calls. That's a record number. I guess it wasn't really hard to beat the first episode. And we also have an interview coming up later on with DariaPlaysRPGs, and she's a YouTuber, lots of experience playing RPGs, and we got a great interview with her lined up. So of course I have my first RPG memory, and it's a little embarrassing. I think anyone who knows anything about RPGs, especially on the Super Nintendo, is gonna cringe when I give my first story at some point in the episode. I'll drop that in. But I wanted to cover this topic because I think that RPGs are kind of an interesting beast in that, at least if you're a bit older, your first encounter with an RPG can often be strange and disorienting because you're so used to side-scrolling platformers or shooters or all these kind of you pick them up and you know exactly what you're supposed to do. There's stuff shooting at you. You move your guy to dodge everything, and RPGs, especially early on, kind of upended all of that. And the pacing of the game, it slowed things down, and it created this environment of play that was just completely unique at the time. Yeah, I think we could just hop into our first call. And our first call is from Neosolid 22, who is a YouTuber you should check out.
So my first RPG experience, I went to a game exchange in my hometown where I could trade in some games. I traded in a bunch of NES games, which I regret at this point, but I don't regret what I bought that day, and that was Final Fantasy II on the SNES. Of course, it's Final Fantasy IV in Japan, we all know that, but to me it'll always be Final Fantasy II, and it was really the first RPG game I played. I took it home, popped it in, and it's still to this day one of my favorite games. I didn't really get caught up. It's a very playable game, and I found it very enjoyable. Like I said, one of my favorite games to today. The characters, everything still sticks into my mind to this day. I played it for hours and hours, and ultimately I did finally beat it. It was very hard, to be honest. It was very hard to start out on a game like Final Fantasy II, but I don't think I could have picked a better series, and I still love the Final Fantasy series to this day.
Yeah.
Just in general, the Dragoon, Rosa and Cecil, just all the characters still stick in my mind to this day. I went through that game so much. I probably played more hours on it than was even humanly necessary. But to this day, like I said, one of my favorite games, and definitely one of the best RPGs ever made, in my opinion. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's funny. This is actually one of the RPGs that I haven't played, and everyone talks about this one fondly. And but that's just a good, solid memory that Neosolid 22 just gave us. One of the interesting things is how you discover RPGs. At least, again, I'm going more from if you're a bit older. They're kind of ubiquitous now in the sense that RPG elements are in most modern games in some effect, even if it isn't an RPG necessarily. I mean, you're seeing it in first-person shooters, things like Destiny, that integrate leveling mechanics and gear and things like that you wouldn't normally associate with maybe a first-person shooter. You're getting it in basketball games and all kinds of stuff like that. But early on, it was the introduction into these things that was just such a foreign concept for a lot of people who didn't have a lot of background, say, necessarily with things like D&D and tabletop gaming, which is something that coming up when we have our interview with Daria Plays, we'll talk about a lot. She has a lot of history with that. Our next story is about kind of the experience of finding out about RPGs and discovering them, and that story comes from Zack.
Hey, Matt. My first RPG ever, I was kind of a late bloomer with RPGs, but it was Final Fantasy IV on the Super Nintendo. Technically, I mean, Final Fantasy II released here in the U.S., but Final Fantasy IV, technically. basically, I used to sit in middle school. I sat with a bunch of nerdy guys. We were all dorks, and they used to all talk RPGs, Super Nintendo RPGs. And I had a Super Nintendo, but I didn't have any RPGs. So I got curious, and I went to a friend's house and I played Final Fantasy IV for the first time. And at first I was like, the graphics aren't that good. This is kind of weird, But then I started getting into it. So I asked my mom for the game for Christmas, and she got it for me. And Final Fantasy IV was not only my first RPG, but the first game I ever truly mastered. I mean, like, I discovered tricks in the game that didn't exist before. There's a duplication trick that I still can't recreate to this day. I took notes when I was a kid about how to do it. It was this crazy, convoluted bug, and you had to go through all these steps to basically duplicate these items. And I've never been able to do it since. I found items like the dragon whip was one of them. I think that was really hard to find. I leveled all my characters to level 99, just completely destroyed the game, and I loved it. And ever since then, I've been hooked on RPGs.
So another story involving Final Fantasy II, Zack referred it as 4, which is the proper numberation if you're counting the Japanese counterparts. In the U.S., you had Final Fantasy I, which is an NES game, and then Final Fantasy II was actually 4 in Japan. It's interesting to me, just, again, I just can't get over how you sort of, it's like this new world that you're discovering, and how you kind of get pulled into the grind. There's this repetition to RPGs. It's kind of comforting. And definitely the bugs seem to get into Zack for sure. So it's not always that warm and fuzzy for people. Stories that a couple of them that are coming up kind of have a lot to do with the confusion and the frustration of what the heck is this thing. So we'll jump into our next call, and this one's from Brandon. And it's funny, this episode we had a theme of two different games in particular that came up, which is Final Fantasy II and Dragon Warrior. This is our first Dragon Warrior story.
Hey Matt, it's Brandon. I was calling you to tell you about my first RPG experience. It was I was so young. It was the Dragon Warrior cartridge for the Nintendo, the original Nintendo, the NES. I recall playing it. I was probably in grade school, and it was so foreign. We tried it for a couple times, and I don't remember who I was playing with, but we attempted to, and we kept dying, and we were like, I can't. There are so many. Why am I dying? Why are there so many slimes? I don't get it. And how are you supposed to win? It was impossible. And then somebody figured out, I don't know who, but if you just fought the slimes and then you went back and you healed yourself and you kept doing it, that you would gain levels and you get powerful and get spells, and all of a sudden the whole thing clicked, and it just kind of came together in a way that made the game make sense. But up until then, I didn't understand what leveling even was, so it didn't make sense to me why I had a level or a status. Your commands at that point were fight, item, run, or status, I think, or magic, and that was it. So it was just weird. And then, for whatever reason, after we got good at it and found everything and the greatest armor and beat the Dragon Lord, and then I don't remember seeing anything. And so I was probably in high school, and I played Final Fantasy II, and I went, oh yeah, I remember how this kind of goes. Because by that time I had experience from Dragon Warrior. But Dragon Warrior was, I still wish I could find a decent copy of that for Nintendo. That would be all it was. Anyway, thanks.
So you may have actually noticed, if you listen to episode 1, you may have noticed that voice. That was Brandon, repeat caller, and he's actually a friend of mine, helping me get this podcast off the ground by filling us with some good stories. Dragon Warrior and a first encounter of it, and not understanding what the heck is going on. And it looks like just through sheer, we paid for this rental or whatever it was, and we're gonna figure this out, brute forcing it with a bunch of friends and figuring out how the heck all this works. And I guess I can just jump into my story, my first RPG story, which is a little embarrassing. but there was a Final Fantasy game that only came out in the United States. It may actually have came out later in Japan. I have no idea, to be honest. But the way I understand it is it was designed specifically for Americans, and the people use the word stupid. That when they made this game, the developers for Square for Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which is what I'm talking about, thought that the U.S. players were stupid. I don't know if that's the proper word, so much as we were inexperienced with these concepts. But my first RPG was Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. And I remember very vividly our local, now non-existent Kmart had a deal of 2 games that were on sale, and I forget what the other one was, and I could pick one. And so my mom actually convinced me to get it for some reason. I can't remember why, and I still remember the cover art was very beautiful, and that might have been one of the reasons, actually. Beautiful cover art, I think. Took it home, put it in. The game's very linear. I mean, even for a JRPG, but it just held your hand. There was no mistaking anything. I still found myself getting confused as to what the heck was going on. And I was very bored with it initially, and very kind of like, this is stupid, was my reaction. But for some reason, I would always pick that game up and play it again. And the music and everything about it, as dull and easy and cruise control as that particular RPG was, I just loved playing it, and I still could pick that game up and play it today. There's absolutely no story worth anything. It's, I think, in the first 3 sentences, you need to save the crystals and save the world, and that's it, and you just off and going. And you heal the sick girl in the village and all that kind of stuff. But that's my very first RPG memory, and very special to me, even though the game is kind of regarded as abysmal. I still love it, and you can't take that away from me, listener. All right, on to the next one. It's another Dragon Warrior story of confusion and then redemption. This is Westapo, and he's a YouTuber as well. You should check him out.
Hey, Westapo here. I have a YouTube channel simply called Westapo, Westapo. Check it out. Anyway, my first RPG experience is actually Dragon Warrior, and I had seen the game in Nintendo Power, and being a huge Zelda fan, I was really looking forward to it. So when it came out, my friend and I went ahead and rented the game, and we popped it in, and it was not what I was expecting. The commands, you had to do commands for everything, to use an item, to fight enemies, to attack enemies, and I was just like, this is stupid, this is retarded. And I didn't like it. I hated it. My friend's dad, though, loved the game, and he ended up playing it for like the 2 days we had it rented. It wasn't until Final Fantasy for the NES came out, my uncle came to visit for Christmas and brought it with him. And for, I think it was 2 weeks that he stayed with us, the whole 2 weeks, my dad, my uncle, and I just camped out on the couch in front of the TV and played Final Fantasy the whole time. It was so much more advanced than Dragon Warrior. The music was better. You had 4 characters instead of just 1. You could see your characters. It had a lot more personality than Dragon Warrior. I was hooked. It was addicting. And we just played it for hours on end. And then you had vehicles that you could use, a canoe, there was a ship. And you didn't have to go back to the same town to save your game every time. There were multiple towns you could save each time. You could use tents to save your game outside of caves. Then the caves were just gigantic. The game was just awesome, and that right there got me into RPGs. So after I played Final Fantasy and loved that game, I gave Dragon Warrior another shot, and then I appreciated it. I liked it. But Dragon Warrior was, even back in 1989, was pretty obsolete compared to Final Fantasy. So it initially turned me off. Final Fantasy is what really got me into the RPG genre. And to this day, Final Fantasy is my favorite RPG series. So I really have a fondness for Dragon Quest as well. Thanks for listening. Later.
So that's Westapo with a great story of initial confusion and then finding an RPG that really spoke to him, getting hooked on it, and then a bit, able to take the concepts, because that's one of those things that I just think is more interesting about your first RPG. The concepts can be really odd. There's a layer of additional input and information in so much as you have the way your health works and the way that you perform actions can be completely different, and so it's not as Twitch based as a lot of the earlier games were, and so very foreign experience. But he pulled through it when he fell in love with Final Fantasy, and then obviously came back to appreciate Dragon Warrior much better the second time around. One of the other things about RPGs is their inception was based in the pen and paper world, and DariaPlays is going to have a story with that, but it really started its roots in as far as gaming is concerned, video games in the PC world, and so we're not going to ignore that. We've actually got 2 calls that kind of deal with that. And the first one is about a series that is very influential in the world of RPGs, and that is Ultima.
I talked about my first console RPG before, which is Final Fantasy IV. Now I want to talk about my first PC RPG, which was Ultima 7. And the reason I want to mention Ultima 7 is because it still has a pretty strong cult following, I would say, but it's not, if you talk to console gamers, it's not regarded, and people don't really understand or know what Ultima is really, but Ultima 7 was probably the first truly open world RPG style game where basically everything was interactive. Basically it was Skyrim in 1991 and 1992. You had to go through all this crazy stuff to get it to work in your auto exec that and all that stuff in DOS. You had to disable your certain type of memory to get it to run through a boot disk. But when you finally got into the game, it's amazing. It's just a living, breathing world. I mean, it's all isometric, old school graphics, obviously, and it looks dated by now, and it's a little funky to play nowadays. But you could literally pick up almost any item in the entire game, short of huge items. You could pick up bodies, you could pick up, lamps off the table, candlesticks, whatever, and put them in your backpack, and it would all just be in your backpack, And the story was amazing. The characters were very in depth and very well written. You could do whatever you want pretty much in the game. You could fly a freaking magic carpet, all around the world. You can raid a pirate base. It's just an amazing game. And it really opened my eyes to the complexity that games, were becoming. Ultima 7 deserves credit for leading the way for games like Skyrim and future games that took it to even another level in the 3D world. But just thought I'd mention that, give Ultima some props.
Yeah, Ultima is a series that I haven't played. I haven't touched at all, and I really feel bad about that because it is very unique. A lot of the stories that I hear out of the Ultima series are pretty incredible, actually. So we have another PC story. This is from Nate from Gaming Rebellion. Zack was the previous caller. He's also from GamingRebellion.com is a website you should certainly check out. I'm actually one of the administrators on it, and they post articles practically every day, except weekends, of course. And it's a very cool website, covers new and old games from a lot of independent writers. And I really encourage you to check it out.
Yo, what's up, Matt? It's Nate from Gaming Rebellion. So my first RPG experience was actually with a text-only game. If you can imagine that, and I know some people have played those, some of the older gamers have played those, there were no graphics to this game. It was all text-based. It was based on Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and it was an MMO of sorts. You would move with north, west, east, south, keys, and it was just horrible in the sense that, you had to, every time you would log out, you would keep your character level, but for some reason, like you would never keep anything in your inventory. So anytime you logged out of the game, even if you got disconnected, everything in your inventory was gone when you would come in. So imagine playing World of Warcraft or Guild Wars 2 or some other MMO that's out right now, and every time you logged out, you had to start over from scratch when you came back in. And when you look back at it, it's just a horrible experience. But the bright side is it actually, since it was my first RPG, it's something that I really got into. And this was actually around the time when Lord of the Rings was first coming out in theaters and stuff like that. So it was it was a hyped time for Lord of the Rings, and that, I think, mixed with playing this game really brought me into RPGs as a whole. Really, really opened my eyes to what you can do. I was amazed that I could play with so many people at the same time, even in a text-based game. You see people coming in and out of the area that you're in, and you're like, oh, that's awesome, So, yeah, I love RPGs, man, and I've always loved them since that first initial experience.
So Nate's story pretty unique. I'm pretty sure he's describing what's called a MUD, which is a multi-user dungeon game that was text-based primarily, or the input was through the keyboard. It was a multiplayer text adventure game that you could play with other people. And you would use a terminal client to connect to a server and play the game. And that's a pretty funny story, though, about constantly losing inventory. That had to be frustrating, but the game had to be good or a blast to play just from the sheer wanting to come back to it. Man, that is a hardcore game to have be your first game, especially. So our next story is from Will. It's kind of about how experiencing an RPG from another person's perspective is really what made him sort of get it and fall in love.
Hey, Matt, this is Will calling in again. The first one that I can remember was a Final Fantasy. I don't remember which. I was too young, none of that stuck. And then the one that probably had, like, the first one that comes to mind for probably most people is Final Fantasy VII, which that one was great and good, but I had one of the OG PlayStations, and it started to crap out on me. Like halfway through Final Fantasy VII. So none of the cutscenes would like properly finish, and it would just freeze. So that was a massive bummer for me, but I still have a lot of good memories of that. But for me, the one that stuck the most, I would say, is the original Diablo. I actually didn't play it too much. I played it a little, only because I wasn't exactly allowed to yet. But I watched my dad play that for hours and hours, and it was like I was just as caught up as he was in like the grind for like better and more awesome things, and the leveling up and picking new skills and the whole like ultimate quest and adventure to get to the bottom of the dungeon to fight Diablo. And that was the one, like that one freaking captured my attention like super thoroughly, is the first Diablo. Second one, not as much because I didn't watch it or play it as much, but the first one was the one that like that stuck with me, like all the hours of watching, just slowly going through these like dark dungeons towards defeating the ultimate evil.
All right, so another call from Will. If you listen to the last episode, he called in on that one as well. And just a great story of watching your elder play a game. Sounds like partially just because he wasn't allowed to himself. But Diablo is a cool game, and it definitely is fun to watch. And I actually have memories of watching my buddies play Diablo 2 because I didn't have a PC. And, I'd already understood RPGs, but I was so confused about the online element and the idea of trading with actual people and all that. That was completely foreign to me and fascinating to watch. This last story is kind of about bridging the gap between the East and West RPGs, and falling out of taste for the JRPGs and kind of the linear nature of them. This story's from Derik from Gaming Rebellion.
I got hardcore into Final Fantasy 3 or 6 if you want to be a pedantic dick, and Earthbound, and since then I've played most of the JRPGs from that era. Though admittedly nowadays, as bad as JRPGs have gotten, I don't actually play them that much, with most of my taste running towards the Western stuff like, say, Fallout 4, Skyrim. In fact, even though I had an NES as a kid, I never once played a single RPG on NES until I was an adult. Yeah, no, I'm probably the only weirdo who's willing to admit that publicly. Thanks for having me on, Matt.
All right, so that's our last call for today. And before we jump into our interview with Daria Plays, where she's going to also give her first RPG story, and it's definitely an interview I want you to hold on and listen to. We're going to introduce next week's topic. Now, this is my plea to you as a listener. I'm begging you, please, call in. If you've got a story. Next week's topic is about, and it falls into, I'm going to try to weave these together like a tapestry. This week's topic is about giving up on a game. And certainly relatable to some people's first RPG story. But what is a video game that you just gave up on? And you decided, I'm not doing this. I can't do this. Maybe it's a game that you were in love with the trailers, and you were so hyped about it, and you started playing it, and you just realized it wasn't for you. But I want to hear your story about it doesn't have to necessarily be your first, but maybe your most memorable game that you just gave up on. And did you ever come back to it? Was that it? Was that it for the whole series? Maybe it was a series of games. Whatever the story, it's something that's memorable to you about a game that you gave up on. And how can you reach the show? There's two ways. You can go to videogameplayersclub.com. And both of these ways are there if you don't want to write this down or you're in the car or something like that. But you can call us on Skype by username Video Game Players Club. So if you're international, that's the best way to do it. If you're in the States and you have a mobile phone and you don't have to worry about long distance, you can dial 805-351-CLUB. That's 805-351-2582. You have until the 8th of October 2016 to call in for this topic. When you call, you'll hear my voice. I'll recap the week's topic. You'll hear beep. You leave a message, and I'll collect your calls and put them in the next episode. So I'd love to hear from you. Really want to hear from you about a game that you gave up on. So this week's interview is with Daria Plays RPGs, and she has a YouTube channel that you certainly should check out. Her style of video, she obviously primarily focuses around RPG games, and I think she has a great style as far as her production, and she has a really interesting way of, she'll show multiple cuts of the game at different points in the same video, and so she's definitely a YouTuber that you should check out. She has a video called The History of the JRPG, Influential Games of the 1980s, and that's definitely a video you should check out. There's also a Sweet Home Reviews video. Highly recommend doing that. She also covers the homebrew and retro, the kind of indie retro scene. Another video of hers you should probably check out if you're interested in that is Haunted Halloween 85. But anyways, let's just hop into the interview. So I noticed when I was watching your videos that you had, you mentioned tabletop gaming with your family, and it seems like your family, you have like a long history of gaming with your parents. Is that something that, because I know you have a kid right now, like it's going to be a couple of years until it's, out of the house.
Yeah, we're thinking about, ditching him, but I don't know, he's going to do it, so keep him around a little longer.
So are you going to keep that tradition going?
Definitely. I think so. Just in addition to like the console, the video gaming that I do, I also have a pretty sizable accumulation of like tabletop role-playing books and board gaming.
Yeah.
So.
And do you do like pen and paper stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Are you normally doing like D&D, or is it like Pathfinder?
It's weird. No, it's so strange. I I have some friends that are really into D&D, and I've played some games, but for some reason, like, my history with role-playing games just sidestepped D&D entirely, even though that's like the most popular game ever printed and everyone on the planet has played it, except for me. So we were really into Chaosium. Was a series, which is Call of Cthulhu, which is horror-based.
Okay.
So that's mostly what I've played.
Another thing I noticed was that you, on your videos, you highlight a lot of unique stuff that might be like, say, homebrew or like the retro indie scene.
Yes.
How did you get into sort of the off-brand, I guess, side of gaming?
Okay, it's kind of a long story. So way back in the day, before I had growing up, all I had was the NES and Genesis. Like, that was pretty much all I had access to. My cousins, who were like 3 years older than me, a little older,
yeah, they
were into PC a lot more. And they had running at this time, mid-90s, 486 computer, and had they discovered emulation. So I'm going over there for like Thanksgiving and holidays and things, and they're showing me like, oh, look, I can run a Super Nintendo game on my computer, and look at all these awesome Japanese games.
Yeah.
And I remember specifically my cousin, he's showing me the Sailor Moon RPG, because my cousin Danny was a huge Sailor Moon fan.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is really cool. I don't understand a word of what's going on, but this is cool. So my brother my family gets a family computer, and we get the internet. And I've actually stolen my mom's credit card and signed up for the internet myself, and I got deep shit for that. But I'm like, no, we are getting the internet. And my goal at this time was, I'm going to find free games.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to find video games. I'm going to play them. So I do. I get into emulation heavily. And a couple years later, I'm 16. I'm dating a guy who works for a web hosting company. So I have free bandwidth basically to run a site off of.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna do an emulation site. I'm gonna do a ROM site.
Oh,
so I do RPG Classics, which there is an RPGs Classics, because I'm really bad about not searching for names before I just I jump in and make my stuff, and then I look and it's like, oh, that fucking already exists.
Right.
So I end up being the other RPG Classics.
Right. Like
I kind of
.NET?
joined up with. Yeah. Like, I joined up with them because we found each other, and they're like, oh, this is really funny. So we each referred to each other as the other RPG Classics. And they would have on their shrines or walkthrough pages links to my emulation site to download the games.
Yeah.
So then at this point in time, I'm just absolving everything. I'm going through all these different ROMs. The big translation site at the time was the Whirlpool, and I'm downloading all these patches and just trying everything I can get my hands on. And again, not having grown up with a Super Nintendo, it's all new to me. I don't know what the classics are. I don't know that I'm supposed to be falling in love with Final Fantasy VI. And instead I'm falling in love with Wonder Project J. Like, it doesn't matter.
Right. So you're getting your own real taste of it instead of kind of an informed opinion.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I think that informs your choices of not being afraid to try. I forget the name of the video that you'd posted, but you were highlighting a bunch of really offbeat RPGs that were like, these combos of like a mix of two genres or something that you kind of wouldn't expect.
Yeah. I think that was for my Little Ninja Brother review.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah. In your Treasure of Rudis review, you had mentioned how the game it would have been helped a lot more had you journaled your like objectives and tasks. And that made me think about modern RPGs, specifically ones by Western developers, where they basically do that for you.
Oh, I know. Everything has got a little indicator that blinks at you and flashes and points an arrow and says, hey, go over here.
Yeah. What's your take on that?
Sometimes it annoys me because I want I want the freedom to kind of explore and not being shown like, hey, let's go over here real quick. And I wanted, because it's like, well, what's over here?
Right.
You know, and some games I feel like you pretty much stay along this path. You don't look elsewhere, because when you're designing a game to do that specifically, why bother putting in all these secrets around you?
Yeah.
You pretty much code to the path.
Right.
And I ran into that a lot when you're playing, like you go back and you play Morrowind, and the game's completely open world, and there's all these places you can go and all these little hidden caves that you can find that have just funny little things in them, or maybe they end up being huge sprawling dungeons you don't know.
Right.
And if you play something like Skyrim, where it's like, okay, we'll go here. Okay, we'll now go over here. And you try to, and if you don't use the fast travel and you try to explore the landscape, there's really nothing to see.
Yeah.
It's a lot of empty, just snow.
Right. You have a 3-year-old, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the transition from being a gamer and then a parent and a gamer, do you, like, what's that like? Because I'm about to be a parent.
I don't want to scare you or anything, but all that free time you have.
Right. So does that, I mean, are you more on portable, like, gaming kind of thing?
I'm using my computer a lot. Like, I have a laptop. I am married to this thing. I love it.
Yeah. So you're falling on, like, emulation a lot more, so you can still play the classics. Okay.
I haven't done much, like, social gaming is dead. Like, when you have a kid, no one wants to spend time with you.
Right.
Even people with other kids. Like,
yeah.
It's just so much of a pain in the ass, because it's like, you have to pay attention to him constantly if he's awake, because he's getting into things.
Right.
And he wants your attention 24/7.
Yeah. So this week's topic is your first RPG memory or memories.
Yes.
And who better to ask? So what's your first RPG memory?
When I was probably about 5, maybe even a little younger. My dad was really into Avalon Hill box sets, which are like hardcore strategy games with little pieces of paper that you punch out. And they probably are not very fun at all, except for really nerdy middle-aged men. But they had started publishing, they had switched to publishing just pen and paper RPGs. Yeah. And in the 80s, they had their big series was Powers and Perils, which was kind of like D&D if you put in a lot more algebraic formulas.
Okay.
As fun as that sounds.
Yeah, sounds like a blast. Let's get it out the TI-88 and start playing.
So I'm like 4, and we're going to play this really complicated storytelling game. And I don't know if this was like they asked me what I wanted to be, or if someone was like, this is what you can be. I don't remember.
Right.
But I ended up being a fairy. And we're on this adventure where we have to go to this, like, we're going up to this huge tower mansion thing. And we have a map, and we have a key, and we're going to explore this dungeon, I guess.
Yeah.
And me being a fairy and being 4, I think it's a great idea. I'm like, I grab the map and fly up to the roof. And I give it to the guy. So I single-handedly, like, completely... I ended up killing, like, half the party and sabotaging the adventure. My brother's 7 years older than me.
Yeah.
And he is just, at this point, he's a, young teenager, middle schooler. And he's like, she can't do that. You can't let her do that. My dad's like, nope, she's role-playing, and that's what her character's doing. She's playing in character as a fairy, so...
That's perfect. That's a perfect character to be for a 4-year-old, too. Like, mischief.
It really was.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But then fast forward to I'm 6, and my brother's biological father buys him a Nintendo for Christmas. Because he's a horrible father, and the only way he can apologize for his lack of affection is by giving him really expensive toys.
Yeah.
So we end up with the NES, and he'd gotten with it a copy of Ultimate Exodus.
Okay.
Because I guess my brother just looked like a nerd, and he's like, here, you like this crappy game. But we loved it. And it was, again, like, it was like, this was amazing. This was hardcore role-playing, but on a TV set. You're rolling up your party, you're fighting the monsters, you're going to the town, buying the equipment, and then going to the dungeon. This is exactly what we had been playing. So it was very familiar.
Do you think that your background in like tabletop, like pen and paper RPGs and things like that, do you think that informs a lot of what RPGs are your tastes?
Yes and no. Like I still, like, as much as I like tabletop role playing, I still don't really go for the dry, serious games.
Right.
Like wizardry or the dungeon crawlers, the roguelikes. Like I need something a little more than just mechanics. Yeah. I find myself drawn to really good stories, really humorous characters. Those are the games that stick with me and that I want to keep playing.
Yeah. So what's a piece of advice that you wish you had when you first started doing YouTube?
Gosh, I wish I knew more about audio when I started.
Yeah.
I think that's my biggest hurdle, has been figuring out how to do audio, because I am a very visual person.
Yeah.
I think I've come a long way with how my videos look, but for the most part, audio is completely alien to me, and it's been a huge hurdle trying to figure out what sounds good and what sounds awful, and I still make mistakes.
Yeah.
So I wish I'd gone into it with a better understanding of that.
I didn't really want to hit gender at all, because I don't want it to be like that. But do you experience...
Okay, now you're asking.
Because you know where I'm going with this.
There has been, I don't capitalize on the fact, like, hey, I'm a girl, I'm making videos.
Right.
Like, I don't do on camera. I don't think anybody really wants me to do on camera, and I'm not pushing my boobs out there.
Right.
But I think it helps.
Yeah.
I think I definitely, in gaining viewers and gaining subscribers, it does help. I can't pretend that it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
As for being treated differently, I think the most people that watch my channel are pretty cool people, are just really into the same type of gaming I am, and we converse on a level as gamers. Like that, I don't run into issues.
Do you think?
But there are the morons that stumble across my channel that leave the really cringy posts. Not as bad as they do on Pam's channel,
right?
But
yeah. Ah, man. Do you think that's partially because of your vertical slice of RPG gamers, that maybe they're a more friendly audience in general?
They're friendly until you say something that...
until you have the wrong opinion.
Until you have the wrong opinion, and then holy shit. I don't know. I kind of like welcome the trolls. Like I want them to find me so I can make fun of them mercilessly and then share it all over social media. Like that's that's like my dream. Like my channel gets big enough to attract trolls.
Right.
Like, that's my goal.
Right.
I think most people are like, I want to do this YouTube thing, but goddamn, keep these people away from me. It's like, no, bring them.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about, one of the things I love about your videos is how you come up with this technique of showing, because the 4:3 ratio of an NES game, you're able to start to intersperse two different moments in an NES game to highlight something you're talking about. And you'll crop part of the shot and stuff like that. And I think that's something I've never seen anyone do that. And it sounds like, because you have an art background, that was just something that kind of came together really well.
Yeah, I would say definitely yes. One, there's a challenge there of, okay, I've got this is my canvas. How do I fill it and make it look good and balanced?
That's awesome. Yeah.
Because I know I have to have something, and that's visually I'm very good with composition. Like I know when things look off, and sometimes if you're really closely paying to my channel, paying close attention to my channel, you'll see me like change a thumbnail like 3 times or 4 times or 5 times because it's not quite right.
Yeah.
That shit bugs me. It would be like a person with OCD and something's just out of place.
Yeah.
Like that's, if things don't look quite right. I can see it and I need to fix it. So yeah, with the composition, setting up the showing two alternate perspectives of a single point is definitely one. I like the idea of it because it furthers the communication.
Yeah.
Obviously, I can highlight a point much clearer when I'm showing visual, because I mean, we're working in a visual medium. I'm not doing reviews on paper. I want to show things visually.
Yeah. When did you come up with I'm going to make a YouTube channel? Were you watching a lot of YouTubers before you decided to do it yourself? No.
Nope. Don't really watch YouTube that much. I mean, more now that I've made friends. I did watch Angry Video Game Nerd because everyone did.
Right.
He's funny. He's got a good entertaining show. I wouldn't say he's a reviewer. He's not, but his skits are funny. I had the idea, a while ago, like 2007. I got a MacBook, and my big thing was I was going to get a capture card for it, and I started to capture footage for Alundra. And I was going to write a review, and I was going to put together a video, and I had a job, and I had a husband, and the combination of these two things ensured that this was never going to happen. I was never going to finish this project, so I didn't. Then last year, a little over a year ago, I find myself, I am now a stay-at-home mom with a small child. Yeah. And I am fucking bored. I hate my existence. I love my son, but hate my existence. So I decided that I was going to do something just for me, and I was going to have fun doing it. Yeah. And so that's kind of how I got the channel started.
So how can listeners find you?
Okay, well, my YouTube channel is youtube.com/DariaPlays, TOO. I'm also available on Twitter @DariaPlays, and Facebook, DariaPlays. I believe I don't know my Facebook link, but I got a page there.
So if they search DariaPlays, that's going to bring you up. I think that brings you up on Google.
You search DariaPlays into Google, you'll find all sorts of, you'll find mostly me and some Russian porn.
Ah, yes. But of course. Makes perfect sense. All right, so that's it for this week. I really appreciate if you can give me some feedback on iTunes. The podcast is available on iTunes. It's on Google Play, which means that it's pretty much on any podcasting app out there. If there's a particular podcasting app you can't find Video Game Players Club on, you can contact me through the website, videogameplayersclub.com, where you can listen to episodes there if you prefer through a web browser. You can also find VG Players Club on Twitter. I really hope you guys call in for next week's show. Anyways, thank you very much. This is Matthew Schultz signing off. See you guys next week.